haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Dalid Amud Aleph at the very top. On Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, the Gemara had explained that the Mishnah begins Or La'arba'asar, and everybody agrees it refers to the night of the 14th of Nisan, where we must make a Bedikas Chametz. Why does the Tana speak about it as being Or La'arba'asar, not saying the night of Arba'asar? Says the Gemara, because the Tana wanted to open up the Masechta with a refined language, and therefore, by using the word Laila, it would have a negative connotation. So it preferred to use the word Or, La'arba'asar. The Gemara now concludes its discussion about refinement of language. Says the Gemara, continuing on this theme, Rav bar Achua de Rab Chia bar Achte. Rav, who was the nephew of Rab Chia, who was also the niece of Rab Chia. How? Explains that Rav, he had a father called Ivu, and his father was a brother of Rab Chia from the same father. However, Rab Chia also had a sister from the same mother whose name was Ima. So Ima and Ivu, they had a child named Rav. So Rav had an uncle named Rab Chia, who again was his father's brother and his mother's brother. Says the Gemara, Kisolik lahasam, when Rav left Bavel and he came to Eretz Yisrael where Rab Chia resided, Omar le Rab Chia, his uncle said to his nephew Rav, Ivu Kayim, is my brother Ivu alive? Omar le, Rav responded, Ima Kayemes. Meaning, he asked, Ima Kayemes, why are you asking about my father? Meaning your brother, why don't you ask about your half-sister Ima? Omar le, so he asked him, Ima Kayemes, is Ima alive? Omar le, Ivu Kayem, is Ivu, your brother, alive? Each time he was coming to then avoid answering directly that he is not alive or she is not alive. Omar le the Sham'ei, Rav Chia understood the remez from Rav, and therefore he said to his Shamish, Chalutz li min alai v'holich kelai acharai lebeis hamerchatz. He said, take off my shoes from my feet and bring my clothing to the Beis HaMerchatz. So in other words, Rab Chia understood from Rav's refinement, as he was avoiding the question, that indeed both his brother and his sister had died. And this was sometime earlier. Shma Mino Tlas. The Gemara said we can derive three things from this Hanhaga of Rab Chia. Shma Mino Ovel Osir Benilas Hasandal. First of all, we can derive that an Ovel is prohibited from wearing leather shoes. Second of all, Shma Mino Shmua Rechoika Einano Heges Ela Yom Echad. Even though this was a Shmua Rechoika, he learned that his brother and sister died beyond 30 days after the Petira. We learn from that his Noheg Avel is only for 1 day. Unlike somebody who hears what's called a Shmua Kroiva, Chalila no Aleinu, that then he must sit Shiva for 7 days. But if he hears Lo Aleinu after 30 days, then he only sits Shiva for 1 day. Ushmamino Mikzas Hayom Kekuloi. And we can derive from the fact that he told his Shamish to bring his Kalim, his clothing to the Beis HaMerchatz. So implies that the Avelis is only for a partial part of the day. In other words, he sits down Shiva immediately after 1 moment. He can already get up, and it's considered to be Mikzas Yom Kekuloi. It's a kula when it comes to the Hilchas Avelus. So these are the three things that we derive from this statement. Number one, Rab Chia is teaching us that an Ovel takes off his shoes. Number two, a Shmu Rechoika is only for 1 day, and even that 1 day is only Mikzas Yom Kekuloi. Says the Gemara Vaiter Ahuda Amre Dunu Dini. The Gemara now tells us of other expressions that relate who the person is. The Omar says, Dunu Dini. the person, every time he got into a discussion in terms of a business discussion and there was an argument back and forth, he would not yield until there was a judgment that was made. Omre, they said, Shmamina midan kasi. We can derive from here that this person who continuously says, Danu dini, that I require a judgment to determine the outcome between you and I, it must be that he comes from Shevet Dan. Dirshu, it says, Dan yadin amoy ke'echad shivte Yisrael. Dan, he will judge his people like the Shevet of Yisrael. Hahu dahava ka'ozil va'omar. Another incident that shows also the person's whose character is based on his language. Akef yama asisni bira'osa. He says, he used to always say, if I had to be able to build a palace, I would build a palace on a seashore. Bodku, they checked him, va'ashkechu de mizvulun ka'osi, and they determined that he was indeed from Shevet Zvulun. Dichsiv, it says in the pasuk, Zvulun lochuf yomim yishkon. Zvulun will dwell on the seashores. Says the Gemara, going back to our Mishnah stated that when it comes to Yud Dalid, the or of Yud Dalid, Benisan boikin es achametz laor haner, says the Gemara, v'hashted de kaimelon de lekuli alma or ortahu. Now that we have established, according to everybody, that when it says or la'arbosa refers to the night of the 14th, that is when there is an obligation to make a bedikas chametz. Then michti, let's see now, bein Rabbi Yehuda, bein Rabbi Meir, both according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir's opinion later on in the Mishnah, who discuss when they require midrabanan to then stop eating chametz. Chametz eino aser ela mishei shos l'mala, but everybody agrees midi araisa there is only an obligation to desist from chametz from after chatzos of Yud Dalid. So, which case, ask the Gemara, v'nivdak b'shis, why don't we then require the obligation to check the chametz in the beginning of the 6th hour? Meaning before chatzos, during the day itself. Why are we going all the way back to the night before to require bidikas chametz? Answers the Gemara of Chitema, Zrizin Magdim L'Mitzvah. If you're going to say the reason why we do it the night before is because of the concept of Zrizin Magdim L'Mitzvahs, a person who is enthusiastic to do mitzvahs, he does them early, then Nivdok B'tzafra, then that would only require a person to then do the mitzvah in the morning, not the night before. Dichsiv, it says, V'yoyim hashmini yimol basar or losor. In regards to Milah, it states that the 8th day is when there is a bris milah. V'tanya says, Kalayam kula kasher lemila. All day long, one can make a bris milah up until the shkia. Elish zrizim magdim lemitzvahs. But the zrizim are magdim in lemitzvahs. Shenemar says, Vayashkim Avram baboykir. So we learn out from Avram Avinu, who was told to bring his son Yitzchak on the Mizbeach, to bring him up on the Mizbeach in regards to the tzivui of the 10th and final test that Avram was given by Akash Baruch Hu, we call Akedas Yitzchak, and it says Vayashkim Avram Babuk. He got up early in the morning. He didn't go from the night before. So from there we learn out that the Zrizim Magdim Mitzvahs is early in the morning, whereby just like in the case of Milah, although Milah can be done all day, it's done in the morning. So too, the Bedikas Chametz, for it to be Zrizin, could also be done in the morning. It does not have to be the night before. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, answer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, B'shah shebnei Adam mitzuyim bebatehem, ve'or haner yafa lebedika. He gives 2 different reasons why the requirement is at night on Yud Dalid. Aleph, he says, that's when people are commonly around in the house. Otherwise, people are running around in the shuk, they're running around doing different errands, and therefore it doesn't facilitate the bedika that way. And secondly, not only are people found in the house, but also when it's dark, you can use the nair, the candlelight, to facilitate the bedika by looking inside the charim, into the holes and the crevices and the cracks, places where people might store chametz. That can be facilitated well at night. So now we have 2 different reasons why it's required to make the bedikas chametz at night. Aleph, because that's when people are found in bays, that's when you can facilitate bedika in the most effective way, ayidei ner or laner. Says the Gemara, Omar Abaye, Hilkach, therefore, Hai Tzur b'mirabanan, Talmidei Chachamim lo lefatach leposach beidnei. They should not open up their regular learning schedule be'or tedechleisar denage arbasar on the night, the evening of the 13th, which is going into the 14th. In other words, the 14th night, in the beginning of the night, they should already not begin their Seder Halimud. Why? Because Dilma Mashcha Le Shmaitze Vasili Imnu Mitzvah. They might be drawn after the Sugya, the learning of the Torah, and thereby they will not then do the Bedika. So this is a halacha that's not limited, of course, to the Torah learning. We're saying even when it comes to learning Torah, but certainly when it comes to making a Suda or any other thing that a person might be involved with, the requirement is to then do the Bedika immediately in the beginning of the night of the Yud Daled B'Nisan. Says the Gemara, Boy Minei Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok. Rav Nachman was asked, Hamaskir Bayis Lachaveroi Be'arbosar Ami Livdoik. Now that we require a B'dikas Chametz to be done on the night of the 14th, so if a person rents out his home to somebody else, so who is obligated to then make the B'dikas Chametz? Al hamaskir livdoik the chamir didehu. Is it the landlord, the maskir, who's obligated to make the bedikas chametz because, after all, he is the one whose chametz it would be, that they would be finding? Or no? Rather, o dilma ala soicher livdoik the isur b'shusekoi. Or does it go on the renter, the soicher, because he now has the reshus of the house? So who makes the bedika? Who's obligated to make the bedikas chametz? Toshma, the Gemara proves, Hamaskir Bayis Lechaveroi, one who rents out his home to somebody else. Al HaSoicher Lases Lo Mezuzah, the Soicher, the renter, he's obligated to then put the mezuzahs on the doorposts. So we see from here, it's the renter who has the mitzvah obligation, just like he does have the mitzvah obligation when it comes to the mezuzah. Equally, he has the obligation to also then do the mitzvah of Bedikas Chametz. Says the Gemara, no. Hasam over there in regards to mezuzah, ha'omar Rav Shasha mezuzah chayvas hadarhu. There's a special requirement that the one who lives there, namely the renter, he's obligated to put the mezuzahs because that's going to be a shmira for him, and that's also learned out that he's the one who's entering the house now. So therefore, since it's now in his domain, he is the one who's required to put on the mezuzahs. That's in regards to mezuzah. But hachamai, what is the din over here about b'dikas chametz? Who has to then facilitate the b'dika? Is it the one who is the maskir, or is it the soicher? Omar lu Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok said to them, Tanina, I have a brisa. Hamaskir bayis lechaveroi, one who rents out his home to somebody else for Yudalid. In other words, he's renting out his house for Pesach, and now, who is going to then do bedika? Says the Brisa, Imad sheloi moser lemafteichos chalar bosar ala maskil liftoi. If he did not yet give over the keys of the house to this soicher, then the maskir, the landlord, he has to make the bedikas chametz. V'imishom mosar lemafteichos chalar bosar ala soicher liftoi. If he, however, did give over the keys to the renter, then the renter will have to then do the bedika. Rashi learns over here that the reason is because when the landlord gives the keys to the soicher, he now makes a kinyan with the soicher. Let's take a look at Tosfos and Dima Master in Mishosam Mishamosar HaMafteach. If he gave over the mafteach, the Gemara says, then it's upon the soicher to then make the bedika. Says Tosfos, Pirush Rashi, the Mesiras HaMaftechos Koine. Ayedei giving over the key to the soicher, now the seicher was koine, the schirus, and therefore he's obligated to make the bedika. Ve'einir l'ri. However, Tosfos asks, that doesn't seem to be so. The ha amrinam b'meruba. We learned in somewhere else, Perik Meruba and Baba Basra, Baba Kama rather. Kishem shekarka niknes bekesef b'shtar v'chazaka. Kach schirus bekarka nikne bekesef b'shtar v'chazaka. The same way that when a person acquires a piece of land, he can acquire it in one of three ways: either through money, kesef, using a shtar, a written document, or making a chazaka. So too when it comes to the schirus of karka. V'lo yamin, we don't say the mahani mesiras hamaftechos, elo kimanda oma lech chazek v'kni kedamin v'haporo. We only say that giving over an object, like in this case a key, will be specifically making a kinyan if he specifies that you should go ahead and chazek v'kni with this object that I'm giving you, in this case the mafteach. And that's not mentioned over here. Could be that Rashi is understanding that's what's going on. He's giving the mafteach to the soicher, and he's specifically saying to him that you should be koine with this mafteach. But Tosfos doesn't want to say that this is the pshat over here in the Gemara. What is the pshat? Says Tosfos, umefarish mi the hocha shemoser loy hamafteach v'loy hichzik umi sheyesh biyod hamafteach kishechal yudad chayev livdoik the oise shem biyod mafteach en yikanes v'yivdoik. Tosfos seems to be learning that it's a pashut din that a person does not have access to the home. If he was given the mafteach, then he has now access as a soicher to then is obligated to make the bedika. If he wasn't given the mafteach, then the maskir who still has the mafteach, he's the one who's obligated to then make the bedika, because he's the one who has access to the property. And since the soicher does not have access, then it remains the obligation of the maskir. So this is a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos, but al kol panim, the answer to the question was, who's obligated to then go ahead and make the bedikas chametz on Yudalit at the night? Is it the maskir, the soicher? So the Gemara had said, it depends. If he gave over the maftechos to the soicher is obligated. If not, it remains the obligation of the maskir.